Algernon Ward. Many of you, I'm sure, know him. He's a reenactor with the 6th Regiment of the U.S. Colored Troops Organization based in Trenton, a member of the Trenton Historical Society. He's active in civic life and is a retired research scientist. We are trying to help him raise some funds for the project that he's going to be talking about today. So you can mail a check directly to the 6th Regiment at their address here at 685 Martin Luther King Boulevard in Trenton. Or you can, they do not have a PayPal on their website with their PayPal. So we have agreed that if you want to donate online via PayPal, you can do it on our website on the donation page. And it would help, of course, when you do that to indicate for sure that you are donating it to the Locust Hill Cemetery project.
A lot of what I have to say is based on the Mazer report and other Fisher's report. It wants to show you that report. But I should begin by talking about the African-American cemeteries in the city of Trenton. Now, I have to say that the Trenton Historic Society has done a lot of good work on that in the past years, and I leaned upon it heavily. They pointed out that there were 21 cemeteries in the city of Trenton with only 3 remaining active. And several of those were colored burial grounds, which have been either disinterred or simply abandoned. The largest of the colored cemeteries is the Locust Hill Cemetery. But there were ones before it, and the interesting part, it tells something about the people of Trenton. The first colored burying place was actually next door to the Friends Meeting House on Hanover Street. There was a plot of land set aside in the Friends Meeting graveyard for burying slaves that died while working for Mr. Yard and Mr. William Morris, who were both Quakers. So they set aside land to bury their deceased slaves. So it was right next to the Friends Meeting House, where the current YWCA is now located on Hanover Street. In the upcoming years, the first African-American religious denomination had been the Society of Free Africans in the city of Trenton. And one of their stalwart members, Mr. Peters, was a good friend with none other than James Allen, who founded the African Methodist Episcopal denomination. In fact, James Allen came to Trenton and preached at the Mr. Peters Cooper shop. He was a barrel maker, and they had been meeting at his Cooper shop. Some say it was in South Trenton, and I could believe that because there's a Cooper Street in South Trenton. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was located there. But anyway, James Allen inspired the congregation to become members of the AME denomination. And so the Mount Zion AME Church was founded. And very quickly, they moved to a new meeting place. They built a church at 135, 136 Perry Street. And like to practice common practice, they began burying their deceased in the churchyard near the church. So they were pretty closely associated with the Friends Meeting House burying ground, and they had a few internments in their own churchyard. Along about, and I'll bring it up to show you. Around 1851, Mr. Wright, who lived on Hanover Street, made a complaint to the Common Council and complained that the colored burial ground near the Friends Meeting House was a nuisance. Why he regarded it as such is a matter for conjecture. I'm sure he made testimony before the Common Council but downtown Trenton was becoming highly sought after real estate, and this color and burying ground was beginning to get in the way. He also, which is interesting and a point for discussion later, he made a plea that any blacks or coloreds who died could be put in the public cemetery or set aside in a certain area, of course, but in the same cemetery as white people were being buried. I bring that up because that would be very early for integrating cemeteries. And it seems that Trenton was more open-minded in that regard than most other places. That didn't occur at that time, but the idea, he advanced the idea and wasn't immediately rejected, was an interesting side note. With the problem with the Friends Meeting House burial site was that the Mount Zion Church did not have deed to that property. They didn't own it. So they had to go to the state legislature in order to get a special bill passed and have deeds so that Mr. Yard actually sold in the 5th Ward, a plot of land near the Assunpink Creek for the cemetery. But they couldn't buy it until they got deed to the old burial ground, which the State Assembly did. And they ended up buying it in February of 1860. The law was passed in 1860, and they ended up buying the burial ground for $1,700. Now, the church didn't have $1,700 all at once, and so the colored women stepped in. They held a fair and a festival in order to raise money to buy the burial ground. They raised a handsome sum of $70, and along with the $1,400 that they got for selling the initial burial ground, they were able to retire the debt to the church to a mere $250. And so they acquired Locust Hill. Can you all see this screen, Locust Hill Cemetery?
Yes.
Yep.
And wonders to behold.
Yes,
Okay,
I can
and
see it.
okay. This is a quick look at some of the graveyards in the city of Trenton. As I said, there were over 21 buried, 21 in the city of Trenton itself. And again, this is about the early burial grounds. I want to point one out that happened around 1804. This was a place called Gallows Hill. And as you might suspect, this is where people were executed. It was near Beak Street, about 3 blocks away from here. It was called Gallows Hill. And it was kind of a pauper's grave site. And in fact, in Gallows Hill was also used as a jail and a place for vagrants. The interesting part about that is that the city of Trenton would issue red tickets and you could get coffee and breakfast there, but it was a very deplorable place, as you might imagine. And it was the source of a lot of ghost stories here in the city. This is the Friends Meeting House in 1779, where the colored people would be buried. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but on the left side of your screen would be the approximate place where the burial ground was. This is the Friends Meeting House as it looks today. The addition on the side, again, on the left side, would be where the cemetery would have been. And as early as 1819, there were starting in 1779 and as late as 1819, they were still putting deceased colored persons in the Friends graveyard. And by the way, they share that graveyard with the signer, George Clymer, who signed the Declaration of Independence. So they have some pretty important company. The first group, as I mentioned, was the Religious Society of Free Africans in the city of Trenton. And these are the ones who named themselves Mount Zion Church. And they formed in February 16th of 1811. And this is Richard Allen, the founder of the AME Church, who came, excuse me, in 1816 to Trenton and was a guest of Samson Peters. On this slide, if you could see the very bottom, the third from the bottom is the name of Samson Peters. I was able to find that from the U.S. Schedule of Colored Persons. He was born in Trenton. He actually lived in what we call now Nottingham Way, and that's where he died in Trenton. But he was also very influential in the formation of the AME Church. Now, I bring up the AME Church because the Methodists in Trenton actually worshiped with African Americans, with Black people, which was, again, very early indications that the Trentonians, the white Trentonians, were very open-minded about, I forgot what's the word, interacting with Blacks, including Blacks in their lives. They worshipped at the Methodist Church together. And so these Trentonians were very progressive. This is the Perry Street, 135, 136 Perry Street, where the Mount Zion AME Church is now located. Of course, this is a later version of the same church, but I put it up so you could recognize it today and know the location. I'm sure everyone who's ridden down Perry Street has noticed it. It sits back a dozen or so yards from the sidewalk. But the early church actually was in that place, but in the very front is the oldest part, and then the back was actually added in 1858. The thing about the AME Church, early AME Church, was that as it was growing, the pastors didn't stay in one place very long. In fact, they lasted about 2 years here in the city of Trenton, and the longest serving one was, name escapes me, but he only stayed 3 years. I think it was Samson Peters stayed 3 years. But between 1860 and 1900, they had 46 different pastors. And I mentioned the Hanover Street burying ground. That was the place next to the Friends Meeting House. And I've also got to the point where I spoke about Mr. Wright. And I also pointed out that in his petition to the Common Council, he asked if the propriety of granting colored people a portion of the burying ground. And this was printed in the newspaper. Again, would be kind of surprising at that early stage. But the city council, the Common Council, approved his complaint and said there should not be any more internments there under the penalty of $10. And as a result, of course, the congregation had to find somewhere to put the deceased persons, and it was a lot of anxiety regarding about what they were going to do, and that's when the colored women stepped in. Miss Perry Hutchins and Mr. Spencer Emmons are the ones who helped raise money to pay for the new burial ground on Hart Avenue, as we now call it. But at that time, it was called Center Street. and Oak Street was called William Street, and Hurley Street today is what's called Cross Street. And this is a slide about the lawmakers allowing them to sell the Hanover Street burial ground north by the Locust Hills. And this is really an act. I'm not going to read it all, but it's permission to sell it. Now, about 13 months after that, the Mount Zion trustees, led by Mr. Peter Perrine, conveyed. Do I have to let them in now that I'm the host? Is that my?
I'm in. Keep going.
Okay. I just as I mentioned about the East Hanover Street burying ground, where the current YWCA stands is the place where the burying ground used to be. In fact, when they were building it, the Trenton Historic Society pointed out that several remains were discovered as they were digging the foundation for that building that's now the YWCA. The colored women were always the doers. I don't think that's news to anyone. They helped raise money to buy not just this burying ground, but other ones in the city of Trenton. They helped retire the $250 debt that was left over from the Locust Hill Cemetery. They did sewing circles, they did bake sales, they did festivals, they did fairs, all in an effort to make sure that any deceased African American had a decent place to be buried. And this is actually a modern day picture of the Locust Hill Cemetery, but it gives you an idea of the kind of the dimensions. It's about 4 times this size in actuality. This is just a small section that I'm showing, but this is the section where we believe most people are buried. At the time, there was a park there. It was called Assunpink Park. There was a parade ground. The military would often go there and drill and have shooting contests. There was a brewery nearby. And of course, you're at the park, you want to have a beer, you go to the brewery. And so it was located somewhere near these grounds, but we're not quite sure exactly where it stood on this area. But it was a great recreational activity. It was a very attractive site. It was gently sloping down into the Assunpink Creek. And so it was kind of a favorite spot in the 5th Ward at that time. It was called Locust Hill Grove, in fact. As I pointed out, where the YWCA now stands, that's where the burial ground, the Hanover Street burial ground for African Americans was located. And also, if you look on your right, you'll see a question mark. That's where we believe the Mount Zion, this is the Mount Zion Church aerial view. The street at the top is Perry Street. The longest building on the right is actually the Mount Zion Church now. The question mark would have been the churchyard where interments would have been. In fact, Find a Grave points this out as the Mount Zion Cemetery that is now defunct. If you look at the roof of the building, you'll see it's kind of in 2 sections, the front section and then a longer back section. The back section is the new part, and the front section is the older part. And when that was built, when the back section was built, that's when they discovered some of the remains of church members that had been buried there. The first published internment in Locust Hill was Richard Rose Jr. He was 5 years and 7 months old. And if you'll indulge me long enough to say, he sleeps in the cold, cold ground, the dark blue skies above him. He was too good to be on earth. None but know him to love him. All is dark within our dwelling. lonely our hearts today, for the one we love so dearly has forever passed away. So he's the first, this 5-year-old was the first published burial in the Locust Hill Cemetery. And this is a map drawing of the Locust Hill Cemetery. You'll notice the dark gray area is what comprises the cemetery. You'll see the Assunpink Creek at the bottom, Hart Avenue on the right side, Oak Street on the left side, and at the very top, Hurley Street. And you'll notice, I'll draw your attention to track number 2, because later on that becomes a very interesting feature of the cemetery. Throughout its useful life, the Mount Zion Church remained in very close association. I should have mentioned at this point that the Mount Zion Church actually started the Locust Hill Cemetery Company, appointed trustees, and it became a standalone organization. But the church still had very close ties. Many of the church members were buried there during the time. But you didn't find much written about them in the local press because a couple of reasons. It's expensive to advertise in the newspaper. And 2, there was still a lot of prejudice at the time, and the goings on in the Black community didn't necessarily raise to the level that needed to be put in newspapers. So if people could afford it, they would put the money, put an announcement in the paper, but it didn't happen all the time. So there's not as many documented burials there as we would like, but we found that there's many more people buried there than were advertised in the newspaper. This is another look at the cemetery. If you look to the right, you'll see an arrow pointing to the graveyard and another smaller arrow that points to John Smith's grave. John Smith was a person of some means, Black person of some means, a member of the Mount Zion Church. But when he passed away intestate. I think that means he didn't have any descendants or family to handle his affairs. So the church mothers, Miss Hutchins, Ruth Hutchins, again, one of the women of the church, she actually handled his affair, including the disposal of his real estate. And part of that was his burial site in track 2 that I alluded to earlier. And she actually acted as his executor and made sure that that was taken care of. And what's interesting about that, because the headstones are missing and there's no map of the burials, the only place that we can identify a grave and know who's in it is Mr. John Smith, because of the fact that he had that piece set aside for himself, and that Miss Hutchins made sure that that's where he was interred. And she was also, Miss Hutchins was very instrumental in all of the fairs and festivals that raised money for the cemetery. And again, this is track 2 showing the little lighter gray area where we believe John Smith is interred. Now, an incident happened in 1883. Barking dogs and lights on at night disturbed the people who lived on Hart Avenue. Something was going on. They looked out a window and saw a horse-drawn carriage or wagon near the entrance of the cemetery. Mr. Muchler got his pistol out and started to go to the cemetery, but his wife made him stop. She figured that if these were body snatchers, he might get killed. So he went and got an officer. By the time they got back, the wagon was gone and nobody to be found. Everybody was in a state of agitation about what was going on over at the cemetery. They saw that somebody had been digging in there. And so they asked for the health officer to come and check because they were concerned that somebody may have died of disease and somebody wanted to just bury them and leave them there. And they were worried about what was going on. So they started digging into the disturbed ground and they found a small casket, in fact. And I'm sorry, they found a small casket and they looked into it a little further. And in fact, there was a certificate for burial and they had found the stillborn child in the casket. And the child had not died of any communicable disease, and that incident was put to rest. But it did make the newspapers telling of the story. In fact, a newspaper reporter came out and he looked around and he identified at least 50 graves. And a neighbor showed him where the digging had done. And he said it was near a grave of James Broome, who had died in 1876 when he was 76 years old. They made sure that his grave hadn't been disturbed, but they had solved the mystery of what had gone on the night before. And the infant had belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Lee of West Front Street. They produced a certificate of burial and gave assurances that the death had not resulted from any contagious disease. They did it at night because they didn't want to have a public funeral and avoid all of the attention that would have gotten. Well, over the years, the Locust Hill Cemetery stopped being used as much. Now, there's a lot of conjecture as to why that happened, but the easy reason is Trenton was very early in allowing Blacks and whites to be buried in the same cemetery. And Riverview Cemetery is notable in that regard. Many Civil War veterans were buried there, and Black notables buried there as well. So without the necessity of being buried in a segregated cemetery, Blacks in Trenton could now be buried wherever they wanted to. And so the appeal of a segregated cemetery began to wane. The problem with that is that if you don't use the cemetery very often, it begins to fade in the memory of the community, particularly when the people who founded it begin to die away and the trustees who were responsible for it begin to pass away. Nobody was responsible. And the Locust Hill Cemetery Company, all of their trustees had gone on to their rewards, and the church no longer have direct responsibility. And so it began to deteriorate. And if it's a wooden fence in a time with wooden stoves, the pickets in the fence began to disappear and the fence began to fall down. And but there were still people around who knew that was an African cemetery. In fact, we can document at least 10 Civil War veterans buried there, and we know their names. So we're certain their death announcement pointed out that they had been buried in Locust Hill. One of the big reasons why the 6th Regiment United States Colored Troop reenactors go over there and decorate their graves on Memorial Day every year, and why we feel that it's appropriate for us to help maintain that the Locust Hill Cemetery. The local GAR, Grand Army of the Republic, had a chapter here in Trenton, and many of their men, for all the time that they could do it, would make sure these their fallen comrades would be commemorated. They would go over and fire a rifle volley and plant flags on their graves in commemoration every year. Of course, as those men passed on, that practice fell off, and the memory of what went on there began to fade into the memory of the people. From time to time, stories about the cemetery would make its way into the newspaper because of the goings on in the neighborhood. Some people began to complain about this open area that's now being used as a dumping ground. And the city of Trenton itself, when it cleaned out its boilers, would take the ashes and dump it at Locust Hill because there's no fence there. There's no the gravestones have been knocked over or covered over in grass. It's an open area. Nobody's looking. This is a great place to dump your ashes. And that's in fact what happened. The city itself would do that, and anyone who needed an open spot to get rid of something, they would take it over to the Locust Hill Cemetery and just dump it. But this began to annoy the people who lived in the area, that this area was becoming a dumping ground, and that it was beginning to look very deplorable, and they would complain to the city, and every once in a while somebody would come out and make an issue of it. And one day someone wrote a very nice article saying this was indeed a colored cemetery. People are dumping in it. This is disrespectful. His name was JMD. Mr. JMD didn't name himself, but he lived in the 5th Ward. He knew that the men from the GAR had gone over it when he was a child, and he knew that they were there. And he wrote a letter to the Times editorial board. When the letter hit the newspaper, the Mount Zion Church took interest in this, knowing that there had been a historical association with it, and they decided that they would take up the matter and try to raise some money to restore the cemetery and keep it from future neglect. But this was in 1906, but and a lot of discussion about it, but nothing actually ever happened. The church did not want to take on the responsibility onto itself alone. And so there's a lot of talk about doing something, even with other churches, but nothing really materialized. So the city of Trenton said, look, let us take this area back from the Locust Hill Company and let's turn it into a park. We call it Assunpink Park, which sounded like a great idea. The Olmsted brothers, who actually designed Cadwalader Park, drew up conceptual designs of a Assunpink Park. The city made motions to buy the land. They offered $4,000 to the trustees of the Locust Hill Company, or their descendants, I should say, assigns for $4,000. Everyone thought that's a good idea, as long as the graves weren't disturbed. And the city promised to listen, we'll do some grading at the surface, but we won't do any digging in the area where people are buried, and we'll make a nice park out of it. In fact, the father of Trenton's park, E.C. Hill, was really anxious to get that done. And the city actually agreed to the $4,000 price tag. And with all that said, nothing ever happened. This, for whatever reason, it got stuck at city council. Does that sound familiar? The Common Council didn't take the action that everyone had worked towards. I don't know the reason why, but it never went forward, even though the condition was deplorable and the money had been set aside. For whatever reason, city council did not actually take the action. In fact, in 1910, the Sanborn Company actually drew up a map of this area. You'll see Hart Avenue on the right, Oak on the left, the large square box. There is the cemetery company property. Since the money had already been dispersed to the trustees of the cemetery company, the city was in a bit of a quandary about who actually still owned it. So they had to actually have a bill passed before the legislature so that the city could take title to that area. After all this work that E.C. Hill had invested in this getting the Assunpink Park project conceptualized and agreed to, again, it just never happened. Without any forward movement, Assemblyman James Hammond introduced a bill in the New Jersey legislature to allow the Locust Hill Cemetery Company to distribute money it had received from proceeds from the sale of land to E.C. Hill. They split the money up and they had that announcement. By the way, doing all of this, the property continued to deteriorate. In fact, the boys in the area, you see an open field, that's a baseball diamond. And so they began to play out there in the open field. In fact, they called it Locust Hill Diamond as the place that they would play baseball. And part of some headstones became the bases, and the kids out there playing, and like kids that want to do, they dig in the ground and for worms, for going fishing and other reasons, and occasionally they would come across human remains. And by the way, that's part of East Trenton lore, I should call it, the verbal tradition. That's how the people today know about this, because their fathers and grandfathers told them about the bones that they had found over there. And when they were kids, how after heavy rain, sometimes bones would be exposed. And that's my history of Locust Hill. It's not the end of the story. The city actually has had possession of it for a number of years, but they sold it to a freight company out of Philadelphia. And the freight company set up a garage on that ground, and it remained there until 2003. And I know in my lifetime, the freight yard had closed, the freight station had closed, and it had become a car repair garage. And I went over there many times getting car parts for my jalopies, and never knew anything about a graveyard. In fact, the first hint I got that there was a graveyard there was when I was registering voters, and the woman that lived at number 73, Miss Ethel Wilkins, said that her yard was a graveyard, and told me, about the lore of the neighborhood. And I talked to some of the neighbors, and they backed up that story. And so I talked to Councilman Nate Walker. Is there a graveyard there? And he started asking questions of the administration. The initial answer was no, not a graveyard there, because the first look, there was a document in the city records that someone had made a complaint that they wanted to buy that land, and it was abandoned, and they ended up getting, I think that was 1947. I think the American Biltrite actually bought that. And it says, no, it hadn't been used as a graveyard, which was true it hadn't been used as a graveyard for a while, but it had been there the whole time. And so as far as the city of Trenton was concerned, there was no graveyard there anymore. And so checking into the records, we began to see that if you went back further, indeed, the Locust Hill Cemetery began to appear in documentations. And so the city commissioned the Richard Hunter Group, and our good friend and colleague, Damon Tavarianis, worked on writing the Hunter Report on the Locust Hill Graveyard. We also contracted with a company called Mazer Associates, who did a very good history of the Locust Hill Graveyard, which I lean heavily on for information. Another good source was Jack Washington's book, In Search of a Community's Past. He helped with the identification of the origins of the Mount Zion Cemetery, and he also goes into Gallows Hill and the Locust Hill Cemetery as well. It's a good source. We also have the Fisher Report, which was an environmental study about how it would be used. We also contracted, I mean, the question was open whether this really was a graveyard for some time, because it could be argued that, you know, that they had been taken out of there. But we hired a group that does environmental studies. They did ground penetrating radar, and ladies and gentlemen, we found rows of returns 6 foot down, all in a row, which is consistent with interments. And so we have scientific data to back us up that those graves are actually there. I would have liked to share those slides with you as well, but as I said, I've been subject to 3 computer crashes this morning, and so I couldn't get those on the screen for you. But suffice to say that we're certain that it's there, and maybe I can bring up some of those pictures if the screen share treats me right, which it never does, but we'll try. And I can identify the file where they occur. Oh, by the way, this is, how long does it take to come up? I did manage to find a fairly contemporary picture of the building that was there before it was knocked down. And where is it? Okay. I thought I had it, but no. It doesn't appear I can go into my files and just bring up a picture and show it on the screen. I'm deathly afraid that my computer will go down again. And by the way, this is a Mac computer, iMac desktop. It ain't supposed to be doing this kind of stuff, making me crazy. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to entertain any questions you may have.
Algernon, this is Sam. Would you say a little bit about the most recent developments, in particular the project that you did with the Council for the Humanities grant, and then what recent action that's happened with regard to the cemetery and the interpretive center?
Oh, okay. I'm happy to talk about that because, well, what's happened is as this project has moved forward. By the way, Ms. Elsa Wilkins and the people of the neighborhood have been having this issue of the cemetery. They've been talking about it at least 25 years that I know of. To everybody in city council and the mayor who would come over and visit with them, they'd always bring up the cemetery. Can we fix that cemetery? And it's waxed and waned in interest of the city, but finally when all these reports have been done, it's been confirmed that it's actually there, interest has picked up. I worked with the people in the neighborhood. They formed a committee at the East Trenton Collaborative of people that live on the street, people with an interest in it. We added Isles, the city of Trenton. Sam has stepped in, the Trenton Historic Society. We formed a team in order to apply for National Council for Humanities grant. Fortunately, the strength of this particular project was strong enough that we won a planning grant. And with that, we were able to do these concept designs behind you, have some preliminary studies done, and prepare humanities programming with Dr. Linda Caldwell Epps and Baye Kemet. So we had a very strong grant team, and we got the grant. And in fact, it thrilled a lot of our community. The elected officials sent us all kind of congratulations. They actually passed a joint resolution in the legislature, you know, congratulating us for working on this kind of a project. So our plan is to move forward with the implementation grant, action grant, and move it to the next step. That also allowed us to plead before City Council to let the 6th Regiment United States Colored Troops be occupants of 73, the house there, Hart Avenue, as our headquarters, and downstairs will be a mini museum, and we'll have someone there now to maintain the grounds, to entertain any visitors, to supervise events, and provide a venue for the people in the community to use at their leisure in the neighborhood. In fact, we see that as a centerpiece for neighborhood development on Hart and Oak Street. There's a lot of dilapidated houses on Hart Avenue, and the idea is once we have a nice facility there at 73, we can parlay that into making it a valuable area. It is still a park there. The Aspen Pink Creek is there. Once the grounds are manicured there, part of our project includes a minnow pond where we can work with the neighborhood youth to raise minnows to introduce them back into the Aspen Pink Creek. We also want to do a demonstration project of how we can use wild plants as biological filters to help improve the water quality. And we use that water to raise the minnows and put them back in the stream. We are envisioning a serenity garden where the people from the neighborhood, I guess you can see it back there, that's what we're talking about, serenity garden, so that the people in the neighborhood can cultivate flowers and plants and whatever. We also envision a small amphitheater, nothing quite as elaborate as they will have on Mill Hill, but basically a flat area with some low maintenance seating where the drill teams can practice, and concerts in the summertime, and skateboarders can do their thing, and just an open area that's usable and accessible to the community. So as you walk along the path of the Aspen Pink Creek, they're able to use that area to their advantage. We envision, as a 6th Regiment, we'll be doing encampments near that area where people can come out and see us do our thing and generate a lot of interest. So from here, we got to do the heavy lifting is to get the money to do all this stuff. So Sam took his screen back. Okay.
I wanted to put up your how to send money to help you. So I'm working on that.
Okay. Well, yeah, work on that.
I figured you'd like that. I'm trying to figure out how to do it again, so just keep talking.
It's generated a lot of excitement, and the beauty of it is that the neighborhood is excited. They're involved, because as we were undertaking this grant writing, we went to every single house, every occupied house in the Locust Hill area on Oaks, Clinton, Hart, Taylor, and we gave them a proposal of what we wanted to do there. We solicited their input with a survey to put down in their own words what they'd like to see. I'm happy to say that survey came back 100%. No one objected. All of them were excited. They all encouraged us to keep moving. So I'm very excited by that. We held 2 community meetings. One to introduce the project to everyone, which was well attended, and the second one was a chat and chew where we talked about it, and I solicited their input. Their main objects were make sure that the neighborhood kids are involved, and of course we're going to do that. We held 4 meetings with the project team, monthly meetings, to make sure that we were following the outline that the grant called for, and we produced a Locust Hill Museum programming guide. Sam Stevens and Dr. Epps actually worked on that, and we had that ready to go. So it's been a community-wide effort. Chris Shimchick from Isles, an environmental specialist, is working with us, and Clark Caton Heights, John Hatch from Clark Caton Heights Architect, also working with us. So we have assembled a community-wide team that is entirely capable of operating, performing this project. But now, with the support of the community and the elected officials, we'll be able to bring this whole thing to fruition. And all I can see is some pretty nice things going forward. Any other questions? I know cemeteries are not an exciting and sexy subject, but the people who are buried there are. And that's our hope, is to illustrate the lives of these Trentonians. Mount Zion was one of the leading churches for over 100 years of African Americans in the city of Trenton. Other churches came up, but Mount Zion was out in front by many, many years of other churches. So free Blacks who belonged to Mount Zion became notable in the community. Samson Peters being one. He was a special man. He helped found the AME Church along with Richard Allen, and he's a Trentonian. And his story is certainly one we want to elucidate. Mr. John Smith. Again, this is something that deserves some attention. And there's about 100 others buried there, and we just want to explore their lives, and that's what the purpose of the museum is for, as well as those veterans that we can identify. Actually, they're a little easier because we do have their names, and we do have their names and can share that with anyone. So this is what we're about over there. Oh, by the way, the community has already said to me, we don't have the gravestones, so we're going to put up a memorial ourselves. We're going to raise the money for a memorial ourselves to commemorate the lives of the people there. So we do have some names. We'll get them on the memorial, but we'll keep digging to, those are the area of research that we're going to pursue to get more on there. And the Army, United States Army, will give us a Civil War veterans memorial that is appropriate, so we can also commemorate the veterans that are buried there. It's going to be quite a special project with the community support and everybody's input. And I'm going to be calling on many of you when we go to apply for funding to do this construction. So look out. I'm going to put you guys to work. You don't think you're just going to come listen to a lecture and sneak away. No. We're going to make you, we're going to put you to work. We know who you are. So any other questions that I could be glad to answer?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Chris Landau, and I'm teaching a studio at Penn. It's called Environmental Animation, and the students are this semester looking at some sites, and one of the sites that was recommended for us to look at, Trenton Green Team, was the Locust Hill Cemetery site. And they knew that work was happening, and they sort of said to, check it out and everything. And it's really exciting to see everything that's happening. I actually have had my students looking at the Mazer report, and we're intensely curious to find out more about the design, and if there's a way that we can help you communicate the design through animation, or even the story. So the students are kind of working on on the one hand, they can do design, but they can also do storytelling about sites. So I think, we can talk more about that offline, obviously, but I would love to, get you involved with the students, and I think some of them would be really interested in kind of working on this project.
Well, I'm excited to have students interested because they're going to be the ones in the end who's going to make sure this thing comes to fruition. Because what's happened is that many times we're short-sighted. We don't pass on the information to the next generation, and we have to relearn it. So if you got students who are interested in working on this, nothing would make me happier than having them work with us. I'll be glad to. We do have a concept design I'll be happy to share with you. Unfortunately, it's in a PDF file, and I don't know how I can share it here. Perhaps it'll come up, but we'll see. But sure, I would love to work with the kids.
Yeah, I can give you my email, and we can connect after the meeting. I didn't want to take up too much time for this. I'm sure people have questions as well.
Oh, Sam, if you share the screen, I did bring up the conceptual design as we have it.
Okay, let me make you co-host again. Hold on, gotta find you here. Here you go. Okay, try it now. You should be able to.
Okay, I'm not sure what I got to do.
Can you find it? First of all, you have to bring it up on your computer, and then you'll be able to do the share screen and it will see it on your.
Okay, there we go. I see it now.
Okay,
thanks.
Got it. Okay.
Can you guys see that?
Yeah. Can you make it bigger, Algernon? Can you make it bigger on your screen?
I can juice it some.
There we go.
All right.
Oops. Now we're missing some of the bottom. Can you scroll it up a little bit so we can see all the way to Assunpink Creek? Oh, there it is. There we go. There we go. Perfect. Yeah.
All right. Remember, I mentioned this is Hart Avenue. This is where the number 73, where the museum is going to be. This is and by the way, we're working with a local blacksmith. We're going to have ornamental gates built here and here and here. On this side, it'll be Locust Hill and locust leaves as filigree, and on this side, it'll be oak, Locust Hill with oak leaves on this side. We're going to plant all oaks along Oak Street, and we're going to put all New Jersey black locusts on this side and around it. This is the cemetery area. This is the area where we're going to have a small pad and the memorials for the civilians and the military veterans. We'll hope to have a walking path that goes through the site down into this larger area, what we're calling the Serenity Garden. We don't know if there's interments there. Once we determine if there is or isn't, there's a lot of evidence that there isn't many back this far. So we'll use this open space for reenactments and plantings. This is the area I mentioned about the minnow pond. We imagine a big rock into a small cement pond. We'll have water inlets from the Assunpink Creek using wetlands to filter the water so that the minnows can acclimate to the water, and we'll discharge it back into the stream. And once a year or whenever they mature, we'll release the native fishes back into the Assunpink Creek. I talked about an amphitheater. This is the area I'm talking about. It's basically a flat area with perhaps some stone type seating here, because you can't build a structure in a wetland. So we would look for carved stones that we could just surround this small amphitheater. And this is where the kids come and ride the skateboards or practice drill team or marching or concerts. We intend to use the powerhouse that's all the way up at the corner. It doesn't appear in here, to power lighting along the entire path. There's a pathway, a walking path that's going to extend all the way down to Assunpink Creek, all the way down here and past there. And if you'll notice, in the middle is a soccer field that the kids could have access to. This is going to be a pavilion for picnics, as well as, I'm not sure exactly what that's going to be, but this is all going to be part of the overall Assunpink Park that finally will get done. And the centerpiece of it will be the Locust Hill Cemetery and museum. There's a lot of housing along here that is dilapidated, and that's going to be knocked down. And just as an aside, how valuable would that single family house be right there, next to a park, next to a quiet cemetery? By the way, the streets are cobblestone. Underneath, while we were there, we actually found out that Hart Avenue from the corner of Hurley Street down here is all cobblestone. We uncovered a cobblestone. We put single family housing here to replace those row houses. And that area starts to become very valuable, very rateable, very desirable, from something that nobody would want to be caught dead in. I would love to own that property right there. You know, no one behind me. I walk outside and I'm headed down to a park and to a creek. And the houses that we're going to replace in here are going to be beautiful. That's what I mean. And I'm not kidding when I say this is going to be the linchpin of community development all around here. These houses on this street, no one lives on this street. Single family housing all over there. And of course, you're going to do that. Why not do Poplar Street right next door? So this, we really think it could be the impetus for genuine change in the living quality of life, I should say, for people in the neighborhood. And by the way, this is off-street parking, so that when we have visitors or meetings, that we're parked in the parking lot and not contesting with the residents for parking spaces. So we're excited, very excited about, you know, the prospect of what can happen here. And we've taken some serious steps along that path. Sam has been very supportive. I can't thank him enough for being giving me this opportunity to talk about this and show what we have. And I can't thank y'all enough for being patient with my computer while it behaves like Hal on the Space Odyssey. Anyway, any other questions? So yeah, I look forward to your kids, and I will share this. You know, this is absolutely shareable as a PDF file. So your kids could help me sell this thing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd love to have you involved in the sort of looking at their work and making sure we're telling the story right.
Sure. A good place to start is the Mason report, as well as the Hunter report. It has a lot of factual basis, but they actually bring up more questions than answers, because only in a few cases do we use people's names. And I'm anxious to find out about the lives of those people. I know that they would be the movers and shakers in Trenton, because they were free Africans. These were not all slaves. Some were slaves that were buried in the Friends Meeting House yard. They were the slaves of Mr. Yard, Mr. Morris. So they were slaves. They were the early burials. But after that, when it became the Mount Zion Cemetery and the Locust Hill Cemetery, these were mostly free Blacks. And by the way, this went on during and after the Civil War. So there was a lot of social upheaval at the time, and these people were at the forefront of this. The church was the ground zero for social change in the Black community, and Mount Zion was leading that charge. So the stories of those people is really what I'm interested in. Anybody else have any questions?
Algernon, I hope it was okay, but I'm going to put your email address in the chat.
Okay.
So people can contact you. Well,
contact me, but don't try to sell me vitamins.
Right. And I'm putting mine in there too, if anybody, wants to try it. And I can send out the Mazer report. I have a copy on my computer as well.
Yeah.
Where
I'd like to see
the Hunter report?
Go ahead, ma'am.
Where can we access the Hunter report?
I got a copy. I can share it to Sam, and he can send it out to you. Not a problem.
Thank you.
Sure.
So, Algernon, we hope in a year or so, if not sooner, but in a year or so, we'll invite you back and you will update us on where you are. And I know that there's a lot of work to be done, but it's an amazing project, and it's really comprehensive in how it's going to integrate history with environment. And so we're at the Trent House are delighted to support it in any way we can. So I'm going to share my screen one last time to put in this how to send money to the project. And
you got my address wrong, Sam.
Oh no!
It's 688.
What is it?
688.
Oh, okay. So don't send it to 685, send it to 688. And I'm sorry, because you should make sure that you check with the post office, because I put this on our website and on our e-blast.
That is the actual address of our headquarters right now. So it will go there. But
okay.
I live across the street, and I'd rather get the mail directly to me rather than.
All right. Well, keep checking that mailbox across the street then. I'm hoping you'll get some donations, and we have gotten some on PayPal already, and which we'll forward to you as we collect them.
That's outstanding. I just want to say about the Trent House, we envision Trenton becoming an attractive historical tourism place. We have the Higbee School, we have the Carver Y, we have the old barracks, and we have the Locust Hill Cemetery, all working in concert. So if someone wants to come to Trenton to go on a historic tourism tour, we have the places that will kind of satisfy every taste and provide them with the richness of Trenton's history from all sides. And we believe that if we have the Locust Hill Museum, the Higbee School, the Carver Y, the Trent House, the old barracks, that will attract people to come into our city and to partake of these things. If you build it, they will come. And I think if we have something, someplace nice to come to, people will do it. It becomes a destination. I've been to a lot of places around the country in reenacting, and some places don't have a quarter of the stuff we have right here in the city of Trenton. I've always found it ironic that we had all of this potential for historic tourism, but we do not use it to the full. And we need to partner with the Trent House and the old barracks and those other locations to make a day in Trenton, Trenton history, and make it very interesting. I know I'm fascinated when every time I step foot in the Trent House. I could spend a day there, but just there, you know. So I'm looking forward to joining the historic site club here in Trenton.